guys? Rob from Georgia here with you, aka VHS82 apostrophe, with episode, where we at now? 22, and we're finally outside of the franchise that is Zombie, right? But we walk ourselves right into Zombie Holocaust. D'Angeli's effort to follow up the success of Lucio Fulci's 1979 masterpiece of zombie terror and horror with his from 1980 Zombie Holocaust, or over here Dr. Butcher MD, as it's released. Two separate cuts of the film, somewhat different from one another. And I do sport the 88 release. Of course, this is back when I was first became region free and was making some orders on the internet, of course, from Amazon UK and 88 Films and Arrow, whatever. This is before, I believe, Severin got their hands on it and has since released it. Now I'm just going to assume the transfer is way better. I'm not sure what is on there in terms of extras, but the 88 release is fine for what it is. It does sport about an hour Q&A session with Ian McCulloch, which is pretty fun to listen to. And it does sport a little interior work. Really, though, in terms of extras, there's really not. Oh, I'm sorry, Eaten Alive, the documentary, the famous one, simply called Eaten Alive, about the Italian cannibal film phenomena, is on here, as well as some a deleted scene, which actually is a pretty interesting deleted scene when you take a look at it, and the trailer, right? Other than that, I mean, but it is a Marino Girolami film who comes in and works for D'Angeli's, and again, to follow up. But we have again Sir Ian. I don't know if he's ever been knighted. Has he been knighted? He ought to have been, man. I just love listening to this guy, Ian McCulloch, man, who plays our Dr. Peter Chandler, right? Alexandra Delli Colli is Lori, and the two, are somewhat an item in here. And then Sherry Buchanan, of course, Susan. Poor Susan. What will happen to Susan? Peter O'Neill as George Harper. A Dakar, I think that's how you say it, who plays Mulatto, who is uncannily, not only was he Dr. Menard's assistant, but he is Dr. Obrero's assistant, the mad scientist in here. And of course, the mad scientist himself, Donald O'Brien. Oh man, Ghost House as Valkos, as Dr. There's my laundry. As Dr. Obrero. And this guy's phenomenal, man. I absolutely love watching Donald O'Brien on film. Ian is an absolute joy to watch. And this is 1980, following on the footsteps, of course, riding the coattails of zombie success that is opening up the gateway to the new Italian horror expression that will saturate our video stores throughout the 1980s into the 90s, right up to about 94, right? When Michele Soavi will have the final thing to say, really, in terms of the golden era that is Italian cinema in terms of horror, right? And the success coming out of a world of the 70s from the likes of Dario Argento, Mario Bava earlier, Lamberto Bava, and just the rest, right? So Zombie Holocaust, let's talk about this, man. He is known, the director is known for, the only one that popped out at me that I'm assuming some of you will know, drop a comment down, tell me if I had to see this or not, but Violent Rome from 75. I think he was into a lot of Euro crime stuff. Wouldn't surprise me if did a Western or two in there as well. He might have. But he comes in and takes over. And now basically, okay, so, as I've said many times, I'm kind of following, in a way, using this Italian horror by Jim Harper as a resource guide to the films that I ultimately pick and decide to do that fall in between 79 and 94. And so, again, like most movies like this, He's not. He doesn't have a whole lot of positive to say on this, and that is a shame, actually. In fact, he even goes after the practical effects, which a couple guys who worked under Giannato De Rossi, who come in and handle the practicals on the ground. Much is to be said about just how second. That might even be putting it high. Second rate this is to the work on Zombie. Now, I'm going to just go. Okay, so like here's basically the synopsis of Zombie Holocaust, aka Dr. Butcher, MD. Basically, this movie runs several pieces, and I'm just going to say this right at the top. I am way more impressed with this effort than I ever thought I would be watching it a couple nights ago. Let me just say that. Maybe it was yesterday evening I watched it. I'm really pretty impressed. Mostly conceptually, ideas, even how some of those ideas are carried out. Could it have been more polished? Absolutely. Again, we're talking about, a film that is sort of being rushed to sort of grab hold of the coattails, so to speak, and it will do pretty well financially for what is poured into it. But basically, a few pieces. One, our opening in New York City, where we are introduced to Susan, Lori, Dr. Peter Chandler. We're introduced to this idea that there is some cannibalism going on. People are stealing body parts from a morgue and attached to a university, I think, in which they, teach things like anatomy class or whatever. But there's some rampant cannibalism, and it doesn't take long before they're tied to a tribe from Quito, which is in the Caribbean, somewhere in the Caribbean, South Pacific. And so that's sort of your opening, and we're given some gory goo going into the bodies and stuff. But that takes up a substantial piece of time, more than you would think. And then we're off with four. We're off with Peter and Lori and Susan and George. I do believe George is the one along with. And they are going to investigate the rumors that surround this hidden island, where they may be able to ascertain the idea of what is going on in New York via finding the origins of it and the cannibalism. They will venture into something that is way over their head. When they first get on the ground, they're looking for a Dr. Obrero who works down there, and he immediately and his mulatto, his assistant, will try their best to ensure that they just get taken to one of the remote islands where nothing's going on. This fails miserably. I call it providential fate, man, destiny, man, that immovable thing, right? The boat sort of conks out. You guessed it, right there off the shore of Quito. And so ultimately they go in. Of course, it won't take long for Obrero to be alerted that they are on the island. He does not want them on because he is a mad scientist doing some crazy experiments. He has got the tribes all nuttied out on revived cannibalism, but he's also doing a lot of mad scientist transplants of taking brains out of living people and putting them into dead people and creating a sort of zombie effect, but not the kind or quite that you would imagine. This is more of a throwback, this film is. Now, on their, as they're ultimately will be on a route to Dr. Obrero's little mission, which uncannily is probably the same church, same mission from Zombie, where Dr. Menard worked out his work. In fact, there is a street that the camera sort of pans through that is probably the same street, I think, that you saw in Zombie, or it's very familiar. But on their route, they get hit with the cannibals, and they barely get through. A few of them die. Ultimately, those who make it to Dr. Obrero are very quickly pushed off, in terms of there is a boat that you can ascertain on the coast. If you just go over there, and that boat will take you to your boat, and then you need to promptly get out of here because you have no idea how far in over your head. But Dr. Obrero is hiding a secret, of course, right? He doesn't want anyone casting a light on what he is doing on this island. And that is where Dr. Peter, of course, they get down to the beach, ultimately him and Lori, and the decision is made ultimately to go back. And because everything with Peter in terms of Dr. Obrero doesn't sit well. And so there needs to be some resolution in terms of what is this guy up to? And what this guy's up to is pretty frightening. Now, there is a scene with the cannibals where Susan is dragged off, and somehow, it's not explained really how, but somehow she ultimately ends up in the hands of Dr. Obrero. And by the time Peter and Lori catch back up, it's a little too late because she is now under the mad scientist's surgical hands in terms of having a brain removed, which is quite a terrifying scene as it unfolds. There are scenes of real good built tension here. And so you've got the cannibals, right? You've got zombies, but that are as a result of this mad scientist. And you do get a bit of a supernatural play here towards the end in the role of Lori. We're told in the beginning of the film that she was born on this island, I think. She grew up on this island, and you just get this sense that she has a part to play here, and that will unfold towards the very end of the film. And when it does, there's a bit of a supernatural, sort of preordained, almost providential play here by some unseen hand that will turn the tide against Dr. Obrero and all the mischief that he is into on this island. And it's got, leads up to quite a great finale, a great suspense scene where Ian McCulloch, unfortunately, is on the table. He's been prepped for brain surgery. And there's a lot of built-up tension where you just... He reminds you of that of a British, of course he is, right? But he reminds you of that British character that you might have grown up as. When I was a kid, I can't tell you what movies these were, although I have an idea that some of them were the old Tarzan movies, the old black and white Tarzan movies. But I always found myself, falling really head over heels of jungle horror, black and white old jungle horror, most of which I saw on TV back in the day. Probably never saw the light of day of VHS or perhaps, any physical media release. They just sort of got lost to history. And that's a shame, right? There was a lot of it, man, a lot of it. And there was a lot of moments in this movie, set aside the Italian excesses, which there are plenty. Not as much as you would think, but there are. There is a real deep throwback to something, where Fulci Zombie is a deep throwback to something old. This is a throwback to things that I would have saw growing up as a young kid, things that would have just been on TV. Now, obviously, the gore level, the works of those two that work for Giannato De Rossi, the score, the soundtrack, which you've been hearing pieces of. There's just a bit of a throwback vibe and feel of this movie that takes me back. I don't get sort of caught up in the inferiority of putting it in the shadow of Zombie or other films. This on its own merit is an interesting, weird experiment of cannibalism and zombies and a mad scientist run amok quality that is, and a bit of supernaturalism sprinkled in for good effect. But in terms of getting back to this guy, I almost forgot. He goes out of his way to kind of denigrate even the practicals and the aesthetics of the zombies. But these aren't zombies. These aren't Fulci zombies that have been laying in the ground for centuries and then are just rising up. This is the work of a mad scientist who has just taken a dead body like 7 days old, and he's putting a fresh human brain from a living person into and so it then starts to decay, and the practicals, the makeup effects on the zombies probably were limited to budget, but you can look in terms of the context of the story. you ought not to expect Fulci's zombies anyways, and why somebody like Jim Harper should suggest that we ought to expect that is what would go against the idea of what these zombies are. These zombies are sort of like a throwback to something between White Zombie and Fulci Zombie, right? And we really, for all in practical purposes, we don't even see them eat anything. Although, man, they are a terror to the natives. They keep the natives on their toes, man. And there's a few times when the natives could have dispensed with, say, Peter and Lori and can't, because suddenly a zombie shows up and just absolutely terrifies them. So there is a bit of stuff running amok in this film that is intriguing, to say the least. It is interesting. Not sure exactly what Girolami was working off or thinking outside the script given to him, and influences. But I was, at the end of the day, I found myself really sort of pleasantly surprised as to the nature of this film and what this film offers, especially the student of Italian cinema and its glory days. So, I mean, it's easy to go after a film and tear it up and just say, it's a piece of junk. It's not, why are there fall leaves, when we're supposed to be in the South Pacific somewhere? It's easy to pick those things apart. I think it kind of adds to the ambiance and just the weirdness of this locale, this island that is just being turned on its head by the work of this extremely effective mad scientist. And who knows what the end effect would have been had he been, ultimately, I'm kind of giving the plot away at the end, but had he ultimately been unmolested in terms of allowing his work to go forward, you don't know what the end effect would have been. It would not have been good for humanity. I say that, definitely. And I just think of his character from Valkos in Ghost House, maybe one of the shining bright moments of that film. I just, Donald O'Brien's awesome, man. And as a mad scientist, man, and just what Lori, the character Lori, the things that are foreshadowed about her character, and what we come to see in the ending, even though it might not kind of make sense, I think after you kind of get away from the film a little bit, having seen it, you kind of start thinking through things. Now, it was made a little bit easier for me a little bit, I'll be honest. I stumbled into a podcast, a new one, Stabby. I'm going to put the link down to the Dr. Butcher MD podcast that I listen to. I found it pretty good. And so if you're a connoisseur of podcasts, always looking for yet another podcast to sink your teeth in, that one is down there. And I that was a pretty darn good podcast. It kind of helped solidify a lot of my thoughts and stuff. And those guys were pretty fun to listen to. So anyways, I'm not sure exactly what else to say, but I wasn't sure in the lead up. I knew eventually I'd cover this film and go into this film. I was really afraid of what I would think. I'm so glad, though, I ventured in. And isn't that Italian cinema anyways? Ultimately, when you do venture in, you find something a little bit different than what you expected you would find. And generally, at least for me, it's been quite blazing. It's been a great ride that goes all the way back to when I was a kid renting VHS tapes out of a video store, man. Finding the works of Dario Argento and Lucio Fulci and all the rest, right? And it helped having Fangoria and Gore Zone to help sort of pave the way with that as well. So anyways, from 1980, also the cinematographer I just mentioned, Colli, he was known for also Violent Rome, but also Alien from the Deep. I thought that's interesting. A nice little piece of work. The transfer's a bit rough on the 88. I'm sure the Severed is probably a whole lot better, and I'm sure there's some extras in there that I don't have in mind. So if this is a film that you are seeking out, definitely go after the Severed release. Check that out before you pick up the 88. I like my 88 just because I have the film, but eventually I may upgrade to that Severed release if I can. But not for the faint-hearted. not a bad little film. Not a bad little film, guys. A lot better than this guy gives credit for. Just saying that. Anyways, a little bit long on this one, but I figured I'd ramble on this one. This one's pretty cool. So here we go. Episode 22 of my Italy's Holocaust, looking at 1980s zombie Holocaust. Hope I said something of interest to you. And don't forget about that link right at the top down below if you want to hear that podcast from Stabby. Always selling stuff for people. Not sure why. Anyways, as always, end these things off with Go Bills.